kavod to everyone that came out tonight to Waterbury's first mental health gathering. I want to start by thanking all the people that made this night possible, our panelists, Rabbi Sonnenschein, Mrs. Beller, Rabbi Daniel Modlinger, our moderator, Mrs. Essie Bayless. A special thank you to Mr. Hanani Abraham, who was a big help with his guidance, contacts, and expertise. Thank you to our generous anonymous sponsor. Thank you to everyone that baked something for the refreshment table that's behind you. Thank you to Mrs. Ricky Bernstein for guiding me and answering all my questions. And thank you to all those who helped out with the recording. But my biggest thank you is to each and every one of you who are here. Just by showing up, you are making a statement that I am here to show support and gain knowledge for myself, a family member, a child, a spouse, and or a friend. You are saying I know mental health challenges are extremely common, and it is okay to be vulnerable and seek help. One of my first interactions with Rabbi Sonnenschein along this journey was, what if nobody shows up? He didn't seem fazed, and he simply stated that if one person shows up, it will have a ripple effect, and that alone will be enough. Meaning just by one person showing up and giving over the information to help someone who is struggling, that alone will make this whole night worthwhile. People were asking what motivated this event. My response is simple but very unfortunate. I am hearing about so many people suffering in crisis mode. People not being able to get out of bed due to depression or anxiety, someone coping with their spouse who is struggling, a mother overwhelmed and unable to manage her daily tasks and thinking like, why can't I just get my act together? And the list goes on. People don't want to seek help for fear of sounding crazy, or they want to seek help but don't know who to ask or how to take their first steps. The goal of this evening is to open the conversation about mental health. It is more common than you think. No one should ever feel alone, and there are many resources in and outside of this community that can and should be utilized. This panel is being recorded, but may or may not be sent out. Decide later, just letting everybody know. And we are working on a pamphlet of mental health professionals and resources, which will be available for the community in Mirza Shem. This is something that's in the works. I would like to introduce Mrs. Essie Bayless as a moderator. Essie is an LCSW and has been working in the mental health field for 15 years with community members and virtually. So, thank you.
Welcome everybody for coming tonight. I want to say thank you to Rifki. This was her brainchild and put countless hours and time and effort and months to coordinate this and make this happen. Rifki's not a mental health professional, but one woman in the community who saw a need and who cared enough to make something happen. So thank you, Rifki, on behalf of all of us. Are you having a say it?
One research.
Okay. And that's really one of the goals of tonight, is to start this dialogue, to join together as the strong Waterbury community that we are, to stand up and show support for each other, and for each other. It doesn't have to be just coming from the professionals, but really from each other as a community to support one another. So thank you so much, Rifki, for making this happen. And from here, we're going to go into a panel with our esteemed panelists. For Sonnenschein, who doesn't really need any introduction, but as the Rav of our Kehila, who devotes heart and soul to our families, who's often the first responder to many families in our community in crisis and not necessarily in crisis. He has a deep understanding of mental health and the person beyond his rabbinic duties. He's already very well known beyond Waterbury. He has spoken at OHEL and other mental health forums. Rav Sonnenschein has a long-standing connection to numerous experts and professionals in the field, and is regularly consults with Gedolim on these important matters. Thank you for leading our community and being here with your experience, your wisdom, and guidance.
Thank you.
Mrs. Devora, licensed clinical social worker from Muncie, New York. Thank you for driving in in the snow and the cold. She's an experienced and very recommended therapist in private practice in Muncie. She is a clinical program supervisor at CEC in Muncie, collaborates with Bastin and courts when needed in working divorce cases, also provides parenting and premarital counseling, and works with clients across the lifespan with different issues of anxiety, depression, trauma, and other issues as well. Thank you for being here. Okay, Rabbi Daniel Modlinger, also from our community. Thank you for being here, is a Yale-trained, board-certified psychiatric practitioner who currently works as a prescriber treating all ages across the lifespan with a primary focus on ADHD, anxiety, and mood disorders. He also brings 11 years experience as working as a beloved Rabbi in Durham, and he's passionate about improving the mental health in today's youth, and it's really a privilege for him to join us today on this panel. So we have a few questions that are common questions with mental health issues, and I'm going to direct them to our esteemed panelists, one by one, who can share their experience, with us. Mrs. Beller, why does the stigma around mental health persist? If we readily seek medical help for physical illness, why are so many of us hesitant to seek help for mental health challenges?
I think my voice will carry better. I think you'll hear me better, right? Okay. So, first a story. I went back to school. I always wanted to be a social worker since I was 10, but the dream did not happen until I was in my 40s. First, I had my family, and when they were pretty solid, at least I hope they were, I went back to school. And when my children, who were teenage and below, heard what I wanted to do, I wanted to become a social worker, they said, "Ma, no way, you're gonna be crazy. You are gonna be crazy." Okay, you have to understand, this was the early 1990s, mid-1990s to end of 1990s, when they said that. There was stigma, huge, incredible. And I did anyway, honestly, I did it anyway. And Baruch Hashem, I think you know one of them, he lives here in town. I think he came out okay. But we continue to have this issue of stigma. It is getting better, it really is, because I asked younger therapists who I supervise what they're hearing and what they're seeing, and they said that it's not as bad as it used to be. But in the olden days, it was, we're not really interested in how you feel. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do what needs to be done. Deal, just plain deal. And if you were a Holocaust survivor's child, then for sure deal. And if you were an American who worked really hard and who fought in the war, then deal. It just wasn't a subject. It just was not something to talk about. So if a child would come to, let's say, a child of that age and say, "I have a problem, what should I do?" They would say, just manage. Think about good things. Think about all the wonderful things you have and manage. And they weren't completely wrong. They weren't, because even in therapy, we work on our strengths. But we recognize nowadays that we need to do more than just work on our strengths and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And it's interesting because, yes, there's stigma. There's stigma about shidduchim. There's stigma about getting into yeshivas and seminaries. Should I put on my application that, yes, I do see a therapist, yes, I do take medication for anxiety, or should I skip it altogether because otherwise I won't get in? That's the worry. Now, sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, but that is the worry. So I was thinking about, why was it a problem, and why does it continue to be a problem? And I think that one reason, and there are many, but one reason is because while it's true that when we have a sore throat, we go to the doctor eventually. Some of us take longer, some it takes shorter, some run, some slowly walk. But we do get the medication we need, and we take it, and we get better. And we're back in the saddle doing what we need to do. We don't think of our brains and our minds as being an organ in the body or a thyroid or an arm. We think of it very differently. We don't understand that the brain needs the right balance of hormones and of chemistry, the whole chemistry system, in order to work for our minds to be top-notch. So slowly but surely, we're getting that message across. It's not shameful. It's something that exists in this world for a reason. Hashem gave it to us as a gift, and we should use it when we need it. Whether we're talking about medication, or we're talking about skills to re-understand how the world runs and what goes on in our minds and our perspectives and everything else, we actually could do such work. So the stigma is there. I'm not going to say it's not. It's much less. And really, the bottom line is we close our own doors and no one takes care of us except us. Women know that very well. Who runs the family, who takes care of the family, who takes care, whether you're a teacher or whether you're a person in the neighborhood or a grandmother or whoever you are, you're a role model for everybody that sees you. And you have an impact on everybody who sees you. So therefore, we need to be the best we could be. And if that means getting ourselves help, then we should not delay. I want to tell you a story. Can I continue? Okay, a story. So I was working in the Rockland County Department of Mental Health, which was a county facility, and many of my clients were the Frum clients because I was officially the Hebrew-speaking social worker. That was my title, so they gave me all the Frum people. There was a woman who was very, very depressed, seriously clinically depressed. It was very sad. And she was maybe 45. And she barely came. But when she did come, she hadn't showered. She was mostly in her bed. She was showing all the signs of depression. And I kept asking her week after week, what is preventing you from taking the medication that will be the key to your life? And she said, I don't want to be addicted. That's what she said. I don't want to be addicted. So I thought to myself, okay, she's a Frum woman. I'm going to be a Frum woman. And I said to her, after 120 years, you are going to come up to Shamayim. You will. And they're going to ask you, so what did you do all day, every day? And you're going to say, I was in bed. And they're going to say, why didn't you take the medication that would set you free and give you a life? So what if you were addicted? So what? What's wrong with that? Even if you're not addicted. I'm not saying you are addicted, but let's say you would be addicted. So what? You have 70 years left, 75 years left. Make something of it, being addicted. That's what I said to her. Lo and behold, I don't know, Hashem had pity on both of us, and she started taking the medication, and she got out of bed, and she started showering and taking care of her children, and she has a very nice life. She really, really does. And it was amazing. Sometimes you have to keep trying until you find the right recipe for the right person. But if you really love that person, you will find that solution to the problem. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Now I'm thinking as you're sharing that story, and I'm thinking about how many times, in my work, that I've had this conversation as well about medication and just education about, specifically, for women and when there's hormonal changes and pregnancy, postpartum, how common it is to experience anxiety, depression, and that it's not so known, about medications, but how much support that we really need to give ourselves to be able to function well for our entire family. So I really Yeah, I hear that. And if only everybody knew how common it was. That's another thing I think about. I think about all the people that I see not only here, but in other communities and virtually. And I sometimes think, obviously, I have, HIPAA, I'm not going to share that information. But somehow, if people just knew who was on the couch or who was on my screen, or that there were other people here, just different stories, but with so many similarities, how much less alone we'd feel. Really think about that. Okay. Rabbi Sonnenschein, how can I reduce anxiety about serving Hashem perfectly? I want to be a good Jew and fulfill Hashem's will, but I struggle with feeling anxious if I don't do everything perfectly, especially mitzvos and davening. And I'll add, sometimes it feels like maybe I just didn't do anything. It's too much.
Thank you. Just before I answer, I just want to take a minute just to echo what you said and to thank Mrs. Radowski for putting this together. They came, to putting this together. I mean, Mrs. Radowski she's everything that makes Waterbury special. She felt something that would be helpful for other people. She believed in herself and in her mission, and she literally worked it through time and time. If you would know how much she had to go through just to find a date to do this. And I think she deserves all of our hakaras hatov, and I think she can have a round of applause. Anxiety about serving Hashem perfectly is really another anxiety. And a lot of times when we're dealing with anxiety about serving Hashem, the serving Hashem part is a distraction from the point. And a lot of times it's not really a question for a Rav, it's a question for a therapist. But the Rav sometimes needs to encourage the person that it's okay to work with the therapist on this. But a lot of times, especially if the anxiety is severe, it needs the same type of care as if it was health anxiety or any other kind of anxiety. And it needs that. Sometimes it's necessary, if somebody's dealing with that and trying to get help for that, sometimes it's necessary to have a teacher, a rebbitzin, a rav involved, because sometimes, and every therapist knows this, that sometimes you need that to say, I'm just going to check with my rav if what you're saying is not apikorsis. When you said, I don't have to second guess myself, So and a lot of times, Rabbanim and therapists will work together to find that way of explaining the responsibilities to someone who's struggling with anxiety. But on my end, I'll talk about what, the Avodas Hashem part of it. And I think it's very important to understand this. I'm a perfectionist by nature, and Yehudis could tell you that I unfortunately gave that gene over to some of my children. But it's not perfectionism is nothing to be proud of. It's a responsibility. It's a weight that we're saddled with. It's a difficult thing. And I tell myself again and again, and even people in this room that have spoken to me have heard me say this dozens, maybe hundreds of times. And to me, it's like one of the Aseres HaDibros. It's not, but it's like one of the Aseres HaDibros. Loi nitna Torah lemalachei hashares. The Torah wasn't given to malachim. Hashem actually had a choice. Because when Hashem was about to give the Torah, the malachim came and they asked for it. And they asked for it strongly, and they backed up their request. So Hashem had a choice. Perfection, holy, the malachim, or imperfect, dealing with issues, traumatized, anxious, struggling, tired, overwhelmed. Who do you want to give the Torah to? And Hashem chose struggling, anxious, overwhelmed. That's what He chose. So it's important to keep that in mind when I'm serving Hashem, when I'm trying to daven, and I'm trying to do mitzvahs, and I'm trying to do the right thing, that, of course, doing the right thing is our responsibility, and we have to give it all we got. But once we try, and once we work on it, so then we say, okay, I'm not a malach. I do the best I can. I make mistakes, and I'm not perfect sometimes, and I have a bad day, and there are ups and downs, and we have to have that ability to be meichel ourselves. It's often obvious to me that we're so good, in this community especially, we're so good at saying nice things to the person next to us. Halavai, we should be that good saying nice things to ourselves and to encourage ourselves. If your neighbor told you, I know I used to daven, I don't daven anymore, you would say, well, you're dealing with the children and it's hard, I'm sure you'll get back to it. But when you say it to yourself, you're just tearing it apart inside of you. So I would strongly encourage you, memorize this. Lo nitna Torah l'malachi yashar, is the Torah wasn't given to malachim, and I think that helps a person not feel like they want to throw it all away. Everything I do matters. Hashem cares about everything that I do. Hashem loves everything that I do. Hashem cares about me and knows intimately what I'm going through. And these two pieces, to keep this in mind, and if this doesn't work, whatever work means, but if this doesn't help, then to speak to someone and not to be afraid to speak to someone, because this is a struggle that many of us had. It makes sense we have it. We're brought up that Yiddishkeit is everything. So if we have any tendency to be anxious, this is one of the first things that we're going to be anxious about.
Thank you. Okay. Rabbi Modlinger. Many people are afraid of taking medication. What's it going to do to me? The side effects? Can you tell us about it, or how they work a little bit for someone who is just starting, this area of treatment, but doesn't really know so much about medication as a tool to help mental health challenges?
It's a very loaded question.
These are black.
Just so you know, we went through, I think, 4 different versions of this question about how to initiate the conversation. I guess I'll start by saying that, the human experience is filled with all different kinds of emotions. That, whenever I ask patients and I go through symptoms, so patients struggle answering yes or no to the questions because everybody experiences every kind of symptom out there. So I think, Kaidim call first appreciating the fact that, what is considered dysfunctional, what is considered functional, what is considered something that, that's happening too often, what is considered something that's happening in, the degree of intensity of the symptom is important to understand. So when a person is trying to figure out, kind of where they're at and if they need medication, it's often hard to decipher kind of what we're dealing with. But I would say like this. First and foremost, you have to allow yourself the grace to feel emotions. And there are times when you're going to go through very difficult periods of life, and it doesn't mean that you have a mental illness because you have a very, very difficult period of time. One of the diagnoses that we officially put for patients that are struggling for a short period of time is called adjustment disorder, right? Because that happens sometimes, adjustment disorder, right? Patients are going through different things. It doesn't mean that, someone has depression. It doesn't mean that they have, clinical anxiety. There's acute stress disorder. So always asking yourself as, what has changed? Am I going through something specific? Is there a new stressor in my life that's causing these symptoms that I'm struggling with? Is it something which is transient? Is it going to pass? So really understanding that and not what we say freaking out when a person is struggling is important. Really also I think an important piece that often is forgotten is that we get so busy with our lives that we forget to do what makes us who we are. So whether that's from a functional perspective, thinking about, are we doing the things that we enjoy, right? Are we taking care of ourselves, sleeping, eating, exercising, are the basic functions of as human beings, and are we feeling good about our ruchnius? So asking basic questions about how am I doing as far as that's concerned, oftentimes if you can focus on that, a lot of the symptoms that a person is struggling seem to fall away. So in a very, that I think that's the first piece, is to appreciate that just because someone is struggling with whatever symptoms, just not to assume that means that we're dealing with mental illness. But of course, assuming symptoms are lingering, they're to varied degrees, they're more intense. What now? So I like to think of a rubber band as a muscle. I always give the rubber band muscle to my patients. When I was a kid, I used to wrap my basketball cards in a rubber band, and that's how I stored them. But as I increased my collection, the rubber band no longer was able to hold my cards and often would snap, and then would fall over the floor. So you'd have to get a bigger rubber band or a thicker rubber band, right? take out some cards maybe, make 2 different piles, right? You have to find different ways to make it last. When someone's struggling, it's important to think about the stressors that are outside that they're struggling with, right? The various things in their life, the environmental component, circumstantial components that they have. And oftentimes those are things you can't really change. So you can't always take out the cards. They just are what they are. It is what it is. You have to learn how to deal with it. So if you can work on that front, you can speak to your chaverim, you can speak to your rabbanim, you can speak to your spouse, and maybe by way of taking down some stressors, a lot of times the symptoms go away. But then there are times when you can't do that, right? There's nothing you can do about that. You have to find a way to strengthen yourself and operate your life from a stronger position. So this is going to be the theme of everything I say tonight, is that when you talk about medication, people think of it in its own category. And I think if I can give you one thing tonight to appreciate, is that medication is no different than any other form of support. You have to understand, when it's necessary. But when someone is struggling, sometimes they go to the gym and they work out and they that's enough for them to strengthen themselves, to put themselves in a stronger position. They take care of themselves. Maybe they go out with friends, whatever it may be. A person has to know themselves what it takes, and sometimes just self-care is enough to strengthen themselves, to put them back on, in the position that they need to be in. Sometimes psychotherapy is needed. Patients have to go to therapy. It could be helpful for them. It's another source of support. This is just about support, and medication is just another option. That's all it is. When it's necessary, when it's not, it's very hard for me to say kind of in a public forum, but the key word here more than anything is support. Some people in this room can handle their life on less sleep. Some people need more sleep. People need various forms of support. That's just how we're all built. So if a person is understanding that where they are in their life, the supports that they've tried to engage in, whether it's self-care related or whether it's they started maybe with therapy and those are not adequate to support themselves in their life, medication is another avenue. That's all it is. We have a lot of things we need to accomplish in this world. We have hopes, we have dreams, and we need to, as was mentioned earlier by Mrs. Beller, we need to lean on the tools that are accessible to us to serve Hashem properly. I don't know, by show of hands in this room, are people hoping that we talk about what to do with your kids, if you think your kids need medication? Because that's a whole other conversation, but I'm curious to know if people want to hear more about themselves and more about their kids. And I think that's a separate conversation. But to medicate or not to medicate, it's a very individualized conversation. There is a lot of stigma around it. I think there's a lot of important pieces to debunk. So just to mention a couple of things, this idea of this chemical imbalance, I'm not so into it. I don't ever talk to my patients about a chemical imbalance. I don't think it's helpful. I think it further pushes the stigma to make it about that. Anyone who knows anything about biology knows that when you're going through a very stressful situation, you have a chemical imbalance, right? What your body does, the way it reacts, the cortisol levels, we can go through the neurobiology another time, but everybody that's struggling is going through some level of chemical imbalance, right? Think about the fight or flight system in your body. Your body doesn't ride at that level all the time. Your body is, it has a resting state and then has a more, when you have to have that fight or flight, that anxiety response, that fear response, there's a chemical imbalance. So just as a helpful way to think of it, just to give a framework, anybody who's struggling has a chemical imbalance, period, end of story. So now you have to understand what it's going to take to put that back into balance. Everybody has to know themselves and what they need. So when someone is officially depressed, so that just describes the degree of symptoms and maybe what his baseline is or her baseline is at the time and why they might need support on a more consistent basis. But I think that's a helpful perspective and a big reason why there's a stigma. The stigma is almost like this person who's like a freak of nature who has a chemical imbalance. I'm not that guy. I'm not that girl. I don't do that. That's not me. It's just simply untrue. So I want to touch on that. Now, by the way, I'm not talking about severe mental illness. If someone's dealing with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, those are a little bit of a different conversation for other reasons. But let's say we're talking in the realm of anxiety. Let's say we're talking in the realm of ADHD. We're talking in the realm of depression, OCD, PTSD, trauma, these types of things. I think that's an important piece to mention. This concept of being doomed to stay on it your whole life is just simply untrue. Anecdotally, in my own experience, I have many patients that have started and stopped medication. It's just not true. So starting medication doesn't mean you're going to be on it your whole life. I don't think I have to spend too much time on that. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on the situation. And then this last thing about pharmaceutical companies, it's all a scam. It's not true. I don't know what to tell you. So those are the people that also don't get vaccinated. I don't know what to say. I'm not sure. I can't comment on that part of it. There's definitely people who feel that way. So I guess medication probably won't work for them. But and then this last thing about Hashem wants me to do it without a pill. I think that's I think I'm going to leave that to the Rav to talk about because that's the hashkafa shabai. But I'm not sure what to say about that. But maybe I'll pass it off to the Rav. Yeah. More to say, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you. And I like how you said that, like, it's a tool, because I also would go with that, line of thought, especially with people that I see. It's a tool to try that could be very helpful, and it takes more than one try, I should say that. Sometimes you have to kind of be patient a little bit along it, but it could really be helpful if needed.
It's one of the big challenges that sometimes you'll finally get someone to agree to go to medicine, and then the first thing doesn't work. I'm like, I knew it wasn't gonna. It's not for me.
Right.
But no, it needs a few tries, and it needs constant. Rabbi Modlinger is very good at sitting with people, sometimes for extended visits to fine tune exactly both before he prescribes and after. And many psychiatrists are like this as well, to fine tune exactly. Just in terms of what you said about Hashem wanting me to do it. I'm not going to speak about it for long. I want to move on to the other questions. But if you think that Hashem wants you to do it yourself, so this is the test for it. If you are a person that does not ever take Tylenol or Advil or Vaseline when you have something that needs Vaseline or lip things for that, so then there might be value to saying that. And even if you're a person that doesn't take Advil or Tylenol, which, please be in touch with me if you are, if you're a person that doesn't eat because Hashem would take care of it, it doesn't bathe because HaKadosh Baruch Hu could keep me clean. That's not the world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in a world where He challenges us to take care of ourselves, believing in Him, davening to Him, trusting in Him, and doing our hishtadlus.
Okay, next question. Mrs. Butler, and I'll start by Sonnenschein, can weigh in on this. How do I address my husband's possible addiction? After discovering my husband viewing inappropriate content multiple times, I worry that he might have an addiction. How can I support him while managing my own feelings of anger and frustration and hurt?
So when we spoke, you said you were going to address it first.
Oh,
because
okay.
I'm not as experienced in the addiction aspect.
Okay, this question is a very, very sensitive question and a very, very broad question. I have one fear about this question, and that is that it will be too little information for it to be understood in a healthy way. So I'm begging anyone who wants to follow up on this question to get the information. I'll say some Rashi Prakim. Mrs. Beller will add some important Rashi Prakim because it is important to speak about, because it's sometimes people could be walking around suffering or struggling and not have anyone to talk to. So it's good to hear something about it. But this is a broad topic, and every single person is like its own world. And there's really two parts to the conversation. There's the issue of a possible addiction or the viewing inappropriate content. There's that issue. And then there's also the wife. In other words, it's not just how do I deal with him, what should I do about him, I'm worried about him, I'm horrified about what he's doing. It's also how is it affecting me, and what is it doing to me, and how is it hurting me, and how is it affecting my ability to be a wife and a mother, and my ability to feel good about myself or comfortable with myself or comfortable in my relationship. And it's very, very important that we not lose sight of that. A lot of times when someone is struggling, he becomes the center of attention and the wife kind of fades out. And And that's just not fair to the wives that are dealing with this. The wives' own world is very, very, very important. And what I would say to anyone who's dealing with this type of tsar, this very, very difficult and painful tsar, is the first thing is to get your own support. Whatever the answer is for the spouse, but get your own support. You could be confident. Everyone in this community, for sure, and in any of the communities that deal with this, first of all, they won't be hearing anything they haven't heard before, and second of all, it's with absolute confidentiality. You do not have to be worried that, quote, that your cover will be blown. Get support for yourself. This is a very, very, very painful thing to go through. Get support. Is it an addiction? Is it not an addiction? Either way, just get support. Support doesn't hurt. Support helps. In terms of the issue itself, with addiction is a very, very, very strong word. And it's a very, very difficult thing to define exactly right here. The simple way that I would explain it is that an addiction means it goes beyond making wrong choices to being something that's a sign of a mental health struggle. It's a mental health issue, not just making wrong choices or being swept away by impulses and so on. There's a mental health issue here. And whether or not it's an addiction, either way, it does need to be dealt with, especially in a community, a firm community. The first place to start is to recognize that the person that's doing this is doing something that violates his own values. He himself doesn't hold of it. He himself doesn't agree with it. And very often the people that are doing that are tortured. And what they're going through inside is very difficult, and very, very often they themselves don't have a clear understanding of why they're doing it and why they can't just decide to stop. So in short, and we have to keep it short. And our job tonight is not to give the 2 or 3 hours that the subject needs. In short, I would say that a wife that's hurting from this herself, she should get help for herself. There are therapists out there that are very, very special and devoted and intelligent and skillful in helping wives manage this issue. And in terms of the husbands, I would say also very, very, very much encourage that he seek help. Without going into so much detail now, I'm going to leave that alone. I will just say the Rabbanim, as time goes on, Rabbanim are very, very acquainted with this issue. And I could tell you in our community that the Rabbanim are educated about this, and you can go to a Rav. You can even contact perhaps anonymously, but you can go to a Rav. I'll just tell you anecdotally, last year, I was contacted on my Calendly app. It said, who wants to have the appointment? It was, I want to remain anonymous. Mrs., I want to remain anonymous. And she got on. She's not anonymous anymore. I've spent a lot of time with her family, but I was able to get her help and to give her phone numbers to call that dramatically changed her life for the better without even knowing who she was. And I think that that's a valuable thing, and hopefully we'll have more resources as time goes on available so that people will be able to do that without struggling themselves with the embarrassment of it and so on. And I will say just one last thing before I give it over to Mrs. Beller. As much as I'm telling you, you could contact anonymously, and because I understand that it could be something that's embarrassing or uncomfortable, I just want everybody to know, coming from a Rav, and this is true with all the Rabbanim and Rabbeim, that we would never look down on a family that's struggling with this. We know what a challenge it is, and we know how complicated it is, and we know that it usually indicates worlds of pain for both spouses. And we, Adarabba, we are filled with admiration for the people that have the courage to reach out and to get themselves help.
I don't think there's anything I can add to that. When we talk about support of the wife, I was just looking at the question, and I was saying that it's really hard to manage, to help somebody when you're furious. And maybe even that help is not what that person needs right now. So echoing what the Rav said, each person needs their own help until they can get to a place where they could help each other. But again, no one's looking down. There's a certain admiration, like you said, and there's a certain compassion that we have for such a struggle. It is maybe not something that each one of us has experienced ourselves, but the raw feelings that are expressed, and the tears, and the pain, and the hurt, and the horror, and all the things that go with it, the unfulfilled expectations, all have to be addressed in therapy for the wife. We didn't even talk about how she deals with the children yet, right? If there are children in this story, we didn't even get to that. But there are solutions, and yes, it takes a while, but we do get there. I have gotten there, Baruch Hashem, and things have turned around beautifully, amazingly, and something that most people would have predicted couldn't happen, and it does happen. And not because of my skill, you know what it is? The will of the person who's sitting in the chair. Their determination, their hope, their tefillos, their everything. We women are very strong. We are strong. We don't even know how. We shouldn't be tested like this. But if we look at our history, and these are the parshios of how strong women are, and if we look at the girls who just came out of Gaza, we know we're strong. We're very strong. And we could do this with the right guidance. But we can't do it ourselves. It's not a take out a Masil Shisharma and figure it out. And it's not. You need professional help.
And there is professional help
And
to be had.
There is.
Individually, groups.
And from people.
Or from people. There's
With
lots of...
the hashkafas you're looking for.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay. Modlinger, and also Rabbi Sonnenschein. How can I recognize and support those who suffer in silence? With so many people keeping their struggles hidden, how can I tell when someone needs help and offer meaningful support?
Probably the first most important piece there is, if I'm speaking from the psychiatric standpoint, is if you're truly concerned about somebody, is to make sure that you're not dealing with something that's a safety concern. So if you're really worried about somebody, let's just cover that first. If you're worried about somebody hurting themselves or chas v'shalom, worse than that, then that's something you don't. There's no gentle approach there. You have to make sure that they're safe. There's nothing you can do about it. So if you're truly concerned about that, that's pretty straightforward. If it's more in the therapeutic arena where you're trying to figure out how to help them and how to support them, so it's a difficult question to answer because I guess it would also depend on the nature of your relationship. Not everybody is well poised to help everybody. It also depends on how much you're willing to give, right? You see something as you see a need, but how much are you willing to sacrifice? So it could be as basic as checking in on them. You can provide secret forms of support, just like we do if someone is struggling financially. Sometimes we give them money, but better than that, you try to find them a job. So if you know one of your friends is struggling, then maybe you can make Shabbos for them. Maybe you can help take their kids. Maybe you can. So trying. There are ways of to support them without doing something drastic, doing something which is sensible, which is normal, doesn't make them feel like a nebuch, so to say. But it really also depends mostly on if the person we're talking about do they have insight into their struggle? Are we talking about someone who knows they're struggling or doesn't know they're struggling? Because that's a big part of it also. So they're suffering in silence, so that means that they have insight or don't. So if they don't have insight, it's going to be very, very hard to help them. because they don't realize that they're having a hard time. So that's going to have to come by way of talking with them, sharing with them. It's really hard to answer that in a very direct way. I would say, everyone has different limitations. We have to try not to fix people. We have to support people. And, there's a famous Rashi that I like to quote on. It says, "Es Elokim es halech Nayach." So Rashi says that Nayach tzarach sad l'taimchai. Nayach needed support to hold him up. So whatever you want to say, Nayach versus Avraham Avinu, Nayach was unbelievable tzaddik. We don't come to his toes. And Nayach needed support. Nayach doesn't need chizuk. Everyone needs chizuk, no matter who you are. Every single person, every human being needs chizuk. So if you know someone's suffering, everybody goes through. Now it's you, next time it'll be me. Today it's you that's struggling. In a few years from now, I want you to be there for me. And that could be a very helpful way of talking about it in a conversation with people, is that let me be there for you, because one day I'm going to need you and I want you to be there for me. So that could be a very helpful way. But it is hard, and it depends on the nature of the relationship. But certainly if you see someone suffering in silence, you do have to try to do something about it. And if you can't do it, try to get someone who's a little closer to them to try to support them.
Shkaya, thank you. Just one or two ha'aras just to add to what Reb Daniel said, which is so valuable. First of all, I think that sometimes we are so convinced that we know what's wrong with someone or what they need. A little humility sometimes is in order. Sometimes the person does know better. And I think included in what Rabbi Modlinger is talking about in terms of how to speak to the person is to include that, like, this is what it seems to, I'm sure, I don't know for all of you, but many of you I'm sure have been told what's wrong with you. It's, sometimes it's true, that's its own kind of pain, but sometimes it's not true, and that's its own kind of pain. So it's kedai to have that humility, to recognize that I may have thought this, I may have it all wrong, and to go into it with that sensitivity. I think that in terms of how to approach the person and speak to the person, I think what Rabbi Modlinger said is spot on. I don't have anything to add. I want to talk about the other part, which is when I can't speak to the person, when I can't approach the person, I can't say anything to the person. And I want to give a little bit of advice about that, and then just talk about what we do when we see someone suffering and we can't help them. Advice is to try in a way that's appropriate, and you have to think 100 times to make sure that it's appropriate, to notify someone who could possibly be in a position to help them. Okay, now obviously this doesn't apply to a psychiatrist or to a therapist or even to a Rav who's bound by confidentiality, but a friend who noticed something or a relative that noticed something can reach out to a Rav, a teacher, someone else in the family. Again, think 100 times before you do it. Am I calling the right person? But sometimes even, I could just tell you personally that people have come over to me about other people, and there's never a looking down on people and so on, and it's never a long conversation. Thank you for telling me, I will keep it in mind. In fact, Rabbanim know that it's so important to keep it confidential that I will not circle back to the person to say, it really came in handy what you said. I actually helped the person. I will not, the person, if you come over and tell me that someone is struggling, you will never, almost never, unless there's some crazy reason, you will never hear back from me about it. I recently got a phone call about someone who was concerned that's not in this community, was concerned that someone had an eating disorder. I think, thank you very much for pointing that out to me. I'll see what I could do. And only much later on in a conversation, in a certain way, I was able to get that person to consult with a therapist about it. Baruch Hashem, over the year it happened that I was able to. Sometimes it's not able to. I have a Talmud in yeshiva that himself went through OCD and was treated for OCD. And he told me, I didn't know that this was true, it's very interesting to me, he told me that since he went through it, he could spot it very quickly. He says he could, when he comes into a yeshiva, he gets to know the guys, he's like OCD, he can spot it, And he doesn't see it everywhere, but he can see it. And he came into me a few weeks after he came into the yeshiva, And he said, I ate in someone's house. He has OCD. And I listened to the things he said. I'm not a diagnostician. I'm not a clinician. I was like, yeah, that sounds very concerning. The things he mentioned sound very concerning. Now, what do I do with that information? I walk over to a random guy in the church and said, hey, I hear you have OCD. Obviously I can't do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that information in my mind, and keep it in every interaction with this person, try to find a way to direct that person towards help, which brings me to the next part, which is what happens when my friend is suffering and there's nothing I could do for her? What happens if I have a relative suffering and there is nothing that I could do? There's nothing, I'll just make matters worse. And I'm so frustrated, exactly this, like the person is suffering in silence and there's nothing for me to do. And I even know what would help them, but I'm just not in a position to help them. And this is where a person has to rely on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is where a person has to say, our job is to do what we could do. Hashem is in charge of everyone, and Hashem is taking care of every yid, and Hashem loves every yid, and Hashem has a plan for that person. If I'm in a position to help, then I might be the shliach of Hashem in that situation. If I'm not in a position to help, then I was not chosen to be the shliach in that situation. I could daven for the person, and that's super powerful. If you see someone suffering, pour out your heart to Hashem for that person. There's no confidentiality issues. Just say, you could say the person's name. If you find out her mother's name, even better. But there's such a thing as saying we could only do what we could do. Many years ago, someone came to me and revealed to me that he has a prescription drug addiction. And it was very, very serious. He was buying prescription drugs on the street. And I have a mentor, as you mentioned. I try to keep in touch with different therapists. And I have a mentor, a therapist who's considered possibly the most prominent from addiction specialist. And I called him up and I said, I need your help. Can you meet with this guy? Such a nice guy, such a good guy, and he's struggling with this, and it's really destroying his life. Can you meet with him? And he said, did he tell his wife? So I said, no. He asked me to please make sure he doesn't want his wife to know. He said, tell him to tell his wife and then to call me. So I said, why? So his mahalach was that when there's an addiction, the family has to be involved. I'm not getting into, every therapist has their own thing, and that probably, I don't have to convince you, probably the wife knows, and she senses something's off. Maybe she doesn't know exactly what it is. And he felt like it was just being sneaky, and it was just starting the whole relationship in a sneaky way, that we won't tell the wife, we'll make believe I'm going because I have a toothache. Like he didn't like that. We're going to be straight, tell him to tell his wife and then to see me. There was no way this guy was telling his wife. There was absolutely no way. So I said to the therapist, do me a favor. I'm a yeshivish guy. Like, I know how to, do me a favor. See him one time, and then maybe together we'll convince him. And he said, Rabbi Sonnenschein, we're not here to twist God's arm. I got Musar from the therapist. He told me, Hashem has a plan for us. If we could help, we'll help. And if we can't help, Hashem has other plans for this person. We don't have to twist things into an unrecognizable form because we're trying to help someone. And that was a game changer for me. Like this desperation, but I have to do something for the person. If I can, then there's a big achrayus to help the person. And if I can't, then I will daven and I will stay alert until such a time that I can.
Thank you.
Can I maybe what was something that just something that there was a second part of the question here that we talked about, like how do you tell if someone's suffering in silence?
I think we're getting there.
Right?
On top. The
Yeah.
first part of that question.
You want to
Okay.
add
Oh,
something?
yeah, yeah.
How do you tell? So I
Yeah.
think that's an important piece and the Rav touched on this already. He said that, not everyone's family unit runs differently. And what you might think is, you can't call other families dysfunctional because by your standards, that would be dysfunctional. I think that's a huge piece, right? Everyone's family unit runs differently. So I would say that if you're in a position where you could help, then you're looking at a change of baseline, right? You know the person in some capacity. and you're noticing some change, particularly around functional things. So you start to see that they're struggling with basic functional, their sleep, their appetite, their, you see them gaining weight, you see they're in social isolation, you have maybe some safety concerns we talked about, their body hygiene is suffering. Like, you start to notice behavioral changes, things like that. That's a big red flag. That means that they're probably suffering with something. Now, we're not talking about one-off. This is something you're seeing consistently is happening. Then that's a good glimpse kind of into what's going on. So that's what I would say is a good way to know, that someone is really struggling and likely needs you to step in to support them and help them out.
And I would add, all these pieces are so important, but I think also not to underestimate the power of being a good friend and a good listener. Before I was a therapist, I was a good friend who listened to a lot of different people, who heard a lot. And I think that life is so busy, and there's a lot on a lot of people's plates, even very close to us, people that we love and know. And sometimes I joke, when someone passes by and says, "Oh, how are you doing?" And I'm like, were they waiting for an answer? Were they waiting for an answer to how am I doing? And being a friend, if you are in that ring of closeness, to do that, and that it's really, really incredible, that support that you can give that could really, really make a difference to people's journey to help and healing. Okay, Mrs. Beller. My parents often vent to me, and I find myself problem-solving and consoling them like a parent. How do I maintain boundaries in a reverse parent-child relationship? How can I honor my duties of kibbud av v'em while protecting my own well-being?
Difficulty. I think the first order of business is whether I'm dealing with children or adults. We're going to assume this is an adult. So we have to find out what the halachos of kibbud av v'em actually are, because a lot of times we don't know. So a person needs a rav, and then just to discuss their situation, which is going to be unique to them, and figure out where they need to be and how much they need to be involving siblings and other people who can be supportive of their parents where they feel that it's too hard for them. I did have many cases like this, and one comes to mind. A Rav called me, and he told me that he had a client who had recurring medical problems, and he felt that they were emotion-based, and he felt that she needed therapy. So it did relate to her parents, and she felt and he felt that they were toxic, but she still needed help. She was just getting sick all the time. So I asked him if we could come down, she, her husband, me, and the Rav, Chassidish family, to discuss the halachas of kibbud av v'em so that I could guide her properly in her work. And he told me, he said, "You're the first therapist who actually ever showed up with the couple." Doesn't prove anything, because maybe he didn't have any issues, but he was so happy about it. And we really went through it, and I had clarity. I wrote everything down. I had real clarity. I didn't cross any halachic boundaries. And we were able, it took 1.5 years of hard work on her part, and she is cured. And she has a relationship with her parents. It's not lovey-dovey. There was too much enmeshment going on to have such a thing. But she learned how to deal with them in a way that was respectful, included them in her simchas without having her go back to her very weak emotional state of being. It was very beautiful. So you need halachic guidelines for this question. Kibbud av v'em is a complicated, we all know, right? It's not an easy mitzvah. It's a really big one. But then if you're going to talk about if sometimes a person is an only child, but there are cousins and aunts and uncles and other people who can be supportive of this family. And then there's the questions of, are they arguing with each other, or they're Do they have the problems together, or do they have problems separately? And then that's another whole setup of questions and halachas. So it's nuanced, but there's definitely answers.
Just if I
Yeah,
can,
sure.
thank you very much. It's very interesting, and I'm happy. I think even when we were talking about this before, it was like important to me that Mrs. Beller answered this question. I feel like our community is just starting to grow up, and we're just starting to reach a point where, as a whole, we're like, this idea that we're taking care of our parents is even on the radar, you know. And Mrs. Beller is from a community that's a little bit more far along in Muncie, a little bit more far along, and she has seen many more generations than we've seen here in Waterbury. So it's important to have that perspective. I just want to mention one nekuda, just as a chizuk, that parents is always a complicated sugya. I say in front of my daughter. It's always complicated, but there's something very important to recognize, and that is that when we're struggling with our parents, a lot of times our spouses are struggling with that. And the same thing goes the other way around. When our spouses are dealing with their parents, a parent is not well, a parent is difficult, a parent is imposing, the wife has a very hard time with that. And both husbands and wives, sometimes it's even harder on the husbands because of the tzura of our families and the expectations, feel pulled. Wife, mother. Anyone recognize that pull?
No.
You know? You know, that pull, can be very, very complicated. And I wish I had an easy solution, you know. We could just say, oh no, it's easy, here's what you do. No, I don't have an easy solution. My chizuk is that we should, husbands and wives, that we should just recognize when it comes up that it's a big challenge for the child dealing with it. We should be sensitive to our spouses who are dealing with their parents. It's a very difficult journey. And just having that little bit of sense, sometimes the shaila needs to be asked. Sometimes the wife will say, I don't think my husband should be spending so much time dealing with his parents. Okay, that's a very important shaila. Mrs. Beller is right. Like, it is this coming together between the therapist and the rav that needs to figure this out. But just the awareness, this is hard for him. This is hard for her. This is complicated. You know, I think could go a very long way and be very important.
If you need to go, we love everyone who's here, it's so important, but if you need to go, we understand that too. A few more questions. Okay. Yeah, as much as we can cover. Okay.
Should we make a time? Should we say 9:30?
9:30. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna, by hook or by crook, we're gonna stop at 9:30.
Okay. Next question, Modlinger, Mrs. Beller, if you can answer on this. How can I help my child open up emotionally? My child is struggling emotionally, but finds it hard to express himself. What can I do to support him and equip him for the future as an adult?
So when we had this the pre-discussion, I said I would take the younger children because you have a lot of experience with the older. Is that okay? Okay. So first, I would ask myself as a parent, I would ask mom and dad, are you open emotionally? Have you modeled this emotional openness in your everyday life with between yourselves and between your children? So that's the first question I would ask. Do you use feeling words as part of regular conversation? Is that happening in your house? Things like, I'm gonna laugh when I say this. I went to the bus stop versus, this is not emotional, I went to the bus stop versus I put on my red boots, I put on my jacket, I ran to the bus stop and realized I forgot my lunch. Much more information there, many more adjectives and adverbs, more expression, more opportunity. Okay, you can kind of transfer that into an emotional situation, not making it too heavy, but we can talk about emotions. Is it safe in your house to talk about emotions? Is it safe? Are we allowed to be angry? I'm not saying we should beat each other up, but are we allowed to be angry? Are we allowed to be sad? Are we allowed to be jealous? Those kinds of things have to be, the home has to be a safe place for any emotion that a child has. So there are ways to foster this, and things like we sit around the table, we turn to the person at our right and say something like, I felt happy when I saw you share the toy with Avi. I had a smile on my face. You have explained to your child what happy is and what it looks like. Without effortlessly. It's not a hard thing. When you read stories together, look at the characters, whether they're animals or people, and try to help the child figure out what they're seeing. These are things that happen, like we read some stories anyway, we might as well. Use this, okay, I said that one. Find the right time, the bath or in bed. The child is usually relaxed, and that's when they open up most of the time. They're not interested in talking to you about how they feel when they want to run out and play. It doesn't happen. Allow him to feel what he feels. We said emotions are permitted. We said okay, he learns from the parsha. Sometimes you could say something like, oh, what person in this parsha makes you feel this or makes you feel that? Let's get a conversation going. Practice making faces and guessing what they mean. Using Play-Doh, or when I was little, my mother used to make us cottage cheese, smiley faces, cottage cheese, pineapple, raisins, carrot, happy. We were all happy all the time. But you could do it. And also, really important, notice what they say when they're playing. Pay attention, because that's where it comes out, their thoughts. And be sure that your children know that when they're telling you things, they're not speaking Lashon Hara. They are allowed to be talking. This is a permitted place to explain themselves and express themselves. We're talking about young children. Okay? That's it for now.
What's considered young, Derek?
Okay, so, we'll leave out the Lashon Hara piece.
But that's what I'm talking about.
Okay. We have a Rav.
I think when a child is unburdening himself or herself to a parent, the assumption is that's okay. Okay, you'll know when it's not. In other words, the siman that, okay, let's not talk about this, it's Lashon Hara, would be the child does not need my support emotionally at all, and I love to hear it. That might be Lashon Hara.
Great, thanks.
I don't have that much to add. I mean, Mrs. Bella really hit it spot on. Ultimately, if you're not going to be able to open up emotionally yourself, I don't want to say you don't have a chance, but you probably don't have a chance getting your kids to open up emotionally. I think it has to be safe to talk about emotions, but also be safe to not talk about emotions. I think that's another piece that's important also. So people, you mentioned bedtime, I think is a great, my wife's going to laugh, but I always, whenever I do bedtime, she gets annoyed at me because I spend too much time with kids. Putting them to bed, I talk to them about their day, and I enjoy it. I love bedtime. It's a great time because that's a time when they're interested in talking.
Wow.
What do we do with that?
I don't know. She got a flashlight on. I don't know anything. Does someone know where to go?
Do it.
What? It's in the bag.
I'll take care of it.
No, it's not there. It's not there. We're sending someone in the back. It's in the next room.
That's cute. I had a girl draw a heart, and they gave her different colors, and they represented different emotions. And I said, coloring your heart. This is not helping you want to be able to.
Yeah.
She colored it. I said, some fingers.
I just find it like whenever, as far as the Lashon Hara question, I was just related
I think that is a concern to keep in mind when possible, and I'm sure that the professionals on this panel would agree with me if I say that telling a child, wow, this seems really important, let's talk about this privately, will only help the conversation. So I think that's great. But I wouldn't tell the child anything about Lashon Hara. Let's be mechanech them about the Torah and mitzvahs separately from this. Let's just tell the child, let's talk about this privately.
Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, you were a little bit cut off.
Yeah, no, so I think not so much more to say, but I think with teenagers also, and probably young kids also, it's especially important not to be so inquisitive. Don't ask too many questions. Use open-ended questions to start the conversation. But if you find yourselves in conversation talking too much, likely you're not really fostering an environment that's going to allow them to talk. So that's an important piece also. I think one of the more important pieces it was a question that really was tied into this that we didn't really get to is let's talk real for a second. If someone's husband is not around because let's say they're in treatment, for example, if you can't say that I miss daddy, then how do you expect your kids to say that? So I think the ability just to express that yourself is very, very, very important. So for you to share exactly what you're feeling is the greatest thing you could do for them. You're teaching them the true narrative of life. If you don't do that, if you block them out because you want to create this force field around them because you don't want them to feel hurt, you're lying to them. And I think that's an important piece. They have to know what life is about, and they have to know that these are real feelings, and that's going to be the greatest thing you could possibly do for them. So if they're struggling at school, sharing with them, and with teenagers in particular, anecdotal, you could share random things. I mean, recently I had a patient and I said, it's so crazy what's going on in LA with the fires, and I can't imagine what that's like, losing your home. That's a great way to talk about what that must be like. You can really engender conversation with teenagers to get them to talk about their emotions and express how they're feeling or what that must be like. There's ways to do it with older kids also. That's not just question and answer in a way that comes kind of in the back end that you can kind of pivot from there. So you have to be original with teens, but that's what I would say. I don't have much else to add.
And it might be between the hours of 11 and 2 in the morning when you're exhausted. But that might be when they want to talk. So keep that in mind.
Let me just mention some of it is a little bit reiterating, but I just think it's important. Kids have different personalities. Those of us that are very, very emotional parents, we go out of our minds when our children are like, how was your day? Good. And I mean, even if our daughter says that, it's hard for us. We have to be careful that it's not our need that we're trying to pull the emotion out. That this, if a child is not so emotional, that's the personality Hashem gave them. If a child has emotions and doesn't know how to express them, that's when we have an issue. And I just, from my experience, I just want to say that first of all, we have to be okay with the fact that we might not be the person they're confiding to. If we send them to a therapist, it might be the therapist. Parents sometimes could even get jealous or upset with the therapist that my child tells you everything. Why doesn't he tell me anything? I'm sure you've gotten that question many times, or it's a friend, or it's the other parent, it's very hard and we feel jealous or angry at the other parent and he's only close to you or she only likes you. So it's important to realize that we're here for our children. And if you're not the parent that the child confides in, and I would ask Mrs. Beller to chime in on this, if you're not that parent, it doesn't make you a less important parent. It's still, you have a super important role to play.
Absolutely. And we also can't, we have to deal with the moment, but we have to know that there is a future. And the groundwork and the foundation that we have, where we permit our child and we don't make nasty comments that the child is talking to the father or the mother, gives that child the security to take care of their own needs. And later on, there's so many possibilities. They change, they grow up, they understand better, they get married, they see things from a different perspective, and then you might be that parent that they come to for other things. So the bottom line is parenting, it's not about what they're giving us. It's about making sure that they get everything that they need and having that vision. We must have a vision. It's true for the children who are going off the derech. It's true for the children who have special needs. It's true for every single child, but we're focusing just on this emotional aspect. But I mean, personalities, you have it all the time. If a child wants to describe a mother, it's not going to sound like the description of the father. It's just not, and it's fine. We're not the same.
100%. Okay. I'm going to skip a little bit just for the
clock.
time. Okay.
What do I do?
Mrs. Beller, I'm going to go to number 10.
Okay, number 10. Okay.
How do I balance my own needs with the demands of those who depend on me, whether it's children, a spouse, or aging parents? How can I ensure I'm caring for others without losing myself in the process?
Okay, so we did touch on this in some of the other questions that we answered. Anyone who's been on an airplane knows you put on your mask and then you put on your child's mask. Yes, you've seen it. And that is a really important fundamental for this question. We are unique, each one of us, and we have our strengths and our weaknesses, and we talked about that before. Some of us can accomplish a lot, some of us can't accomplish as much. So when we find ourselves not finding the time to take care of our exercise and our eating and our sleeping and those things, we need to get help. Help meaning maybe more cleaning help, maybe more babysitting help, maybe streamlining our lives and not getting involved in as many projects, even though it's the in thing to do and all my friends are doing it. Really have to take a cheshbon and nefesh and see how far can you stretch yourself. But I do think that a very important piece is the marriage. That has to be front and center, because that's what nourishes the wife, besides the husband, but it also nourishes the wife. You cannot skimp on it. Got to figure it out with the husband, how we're going to do this. And he's a partner in this decision of how you take care of yourself. So if you have a husband who understands that, or if you need help with that, you can get somebody to help the two of you work on that, and then the sky's the limit. Still, there are only 24 hours in a day. I personally need my 9 hours of sleep, and it doesn't help that I'm getting older. I still need 9 hours of sleep. And so it has to be built into my day. My 24 hours has to have 9 hours of sleep, period. What I accomplish in the rest of the time is balanced. There's a piece of this and a piece of that, and there's time for me, and there's socializing. There's all kinds of things. And it's with the collaboration of my husband. It's important, because otherwise he's going to say, how come you didn't have time for this? I was too tired. I couldn't do it. Then he'll step in, or you'll get somebody to do it for you, or you'll buy the cake. Whatever it is. That's very important to realize that we each are different, and we have our needs, and it's legitimate to have our needs. When we say Shasani Kirtsono every day, we have to really mean it and think about it. What does that mean? I'm not you and you're not me, and it's just plain fine. Hashem wants me this way. Also to use positive self-talk and to remind yourself that when you are doing things for your family, you're doing chesed. And that gives you a boost. You're not just stam diapering a baby. You are uplifting the diapering with chesed. And that gives you that spiritual piece. So there's lots more to talk about. Loads. But this is just like the starting point.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I mean, feel free to disagree.
Can I ask one more, number 3?
Okay.
Yeah?
I'll take the Muslim, Mrs. Dunn.
It is something to, as the only two husbands here, it is important. A lot of times husbands don't really understand, and they're not being bad or mean. I get it all the time. My wife is always tired. Sometimes that might mean that she needs some help if something's going on, but sometimes, like, you don't understand what it means that she stayed home that day with the kids. You don't understand what a pregnancy does. They always talk about, like, if only a man could be pregnant for a day, you don't understand the months of recovery after a baby until you get your strength back. All of these things, and then everything interplays because, right, you know this, right? The other kids don't move out when you're dealing with the newborn, right? That doesn't happen. Sometimes husbands need to be explained this. Sometimes you could explain it to him. Sometimes maybe you need someone else to explain it to him. But it is something, when Rabbi Modlinger says in his humility, that we'll take the musar, I think that we have musar to take.
I wasn't intending that.
That's why it was so effective.
I think that's big what you're saying about communicating. To assume they're not you. They're not you. And they don't think of it exactly the same as you. And what a snow day means for a woman and a snow day means for a man, it's just two different.
What the Super Bowl means to a woman and a Super Bowl.
Right, exactly. And that's why when we can communicate without assuming that harm was intended when it wasn't. It's very important. Okay. Can I ask number 3, the last one?
Sure.
Quick, okay. Rabbi Modlinger, how do I support my children when a parent is struggling with a mental health crisis? When a parent is consumed by treatment and recovery, how can I ensure the children aren't negatively impacted? And how do I fill the void left by my spouse? Another loaded question.
Yeah, so I think we touched a little bit on this, but I think like many secrets to chinuch solutions, right? There's no tricks in chinuch, right? If you can't, if you're not holding there, it's very hard to. The solution is for you to steig and for you to do well and for you to display that good behavior. So when it comes to a child who's struggling, a parent who's struggling with mental health, a sibling who's struggling with something. It doesn't matter who it is. You can't really avoid having your children being impacted by parents struggling. And I think that's an important piece to start, because I don't think you should be avoiding it. I think it's a very unhealthy approach. So the question itself, I think, is it's important to target that. We've talked about a couple of times already how you have to appreciate normal human experiences, normal human responses to things. Recognizing regulated responses versus dysregulated responses. One of the greatest threats to mental health is avoidance. And, when we try to avoid being uncomfortable, we deny the human experience of emotions. So you have to allow that to happen. Not just allow your kids to be that way, but allow yourself to be that way in front of your kids. Obviously, there's a balance you can't break down. They need your strength. But, if you want to develop a language around emotions, you have to become comfortable with them. We've talked about that a little bit. But, whenever I ask patients about, emotional dysregulation. So when something when something good happens, we're happy. When something bad happens, we're sad. That patients say, I cry. I cry all the time. But they're sharing it's a response to a certain impetus that happened. That makes sense why they would cry. That's fine. That's a very regulated response. When it's dysregulated, when it's coming from a place where there's really no impetus, there's no reason, there's no rhyme or reason. Okay, so now we have to figure out what's going on. But I think just tapping into that if something is going on, if mommy is struggling or daddy is struggling or a sibling is struggling, everybody should be feeling some level of pain and suffering, and everybody should be feeling those emotions. And if they want to talk about it, great. If they don't want to talk about it, also great. But I think you displaying that good behavior, as we talked about, is very important. Not really much else to add. We've talked about kind of when to do it. Maybe bedtime would be a good example, but that's what I would say to this question.
And I like what we don't always have the answers. We don't always have the answers, but our presence and listening we can't always just fix it, but that goes a long way.
Rabbi Modlinger also snuck in there an unbelievable yesod and chinuch of when you said you could express the pain and not fall apart. That the whole answer was huge, but that piece is important for this answer and important for so many other things. We need to be able to be vulnerable to our children and to say, I'm going through a hard time. This is difficult. Sometimes a person goes through a loss. A family member dies. So our children come home from school and, yeah, I'm sad. This is difficult. And that's a balance. I think Rabbi Modlinger said it so well, to be able to express and to be able to be vulnerable, because that shows how we talk about emotions. The thing, and even in the way we're talking, I would never advise telling a child, I don't know how I'm going to go on. I would not advise, you could say, I'm in a lot of pain, but Amir Hashem will be able to go on. So there's that delicate balance, for bringing that up, that delicate balance of being able to express vulnerability, but not to dump on our child the job of figuring out how we're going to go on. Chas v'shalom.
One for any comments? Sure. Time-wise.
Yeah, I think...
Okay, so thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight in the cold, and thank you to all our panelists for your experience, your wisdom, for opening up this dialogue, and Amir Hashem, to continue to, be the strong Waterbury community that we are, and to lessen the shame and the loneliness, and to extend the compassion and the resources that there are, and support to one another. So really thank you to everybody for being here, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.